The project started really a few months ago when Molly Rogers, who's part of the Centre for the History of Medicine at the University of Warwick, came to talk to me about the possibility of involving performance as part of the celebration of the closure of the hospital. And I must say it appealed to me personally so much that I said to Molly, actually, can I make something for this project? And she thought that was a great idea. So I spoke to Cecilia, who I've worked closely with a lot of times in the past, and we thought about how wonderful it would be to bring together a group of dancers of all ages and musicians to spend some time in the hospital and picking up the vibe of the hospital, noticing what's going on, and also, importantly, using some of the source material that Molly had been working on in terms of getting oral histories and artefacts and so on related to the hospital, and use that as our resource, really. So we've spent 3 days in the hospital, 2 days over the weekend and yesterday, working in this one particular location. And it's a nice location because it's very much a place where people come through and enter and exit, and things happen within the space as well as passing through the space. I was reminded of 12 Beds actually just the other day because it was a very interesting project where we worked together with the History of Medicine at the University of Warwick. We were looking at the history of the Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital, and it was going through a process of closure, and the whole hospital was being relocated to a different part of the city, and the hospital was right in the middle of the city, and it was seen to be such an important part of the city. And of course so many people had experience of being there, working there, being treated there, visiting people there, so it was very much at the heart of the community of the city. And I met with some colleagues at History of Medicine at Warwick, and we looked at building a series of performances actually, so there were other performances as well, but ones that would be generated through the memories and experiences of those who'd had some time at the hospital to mark, celebrate, and also, I suppose, sort of come to terms with the closure of the hospital. So the work that I did, I worked with a close friend of mine, choreographer Celia McFarlane, a number of dancers, including actually my own daughter, who was 8 at the time, I think. So we did an intergenerational piece because we felt that something about the hospital was about this intergenerational community. And we found people who'd had experience of the hospital, and we built a number of oral histories. And some of those, of course, were very funny. They came from nurses, from doctors, from patients, all of whom had some story to tell about their experience. And so we used these as source materials. And what we wanted to do was build a site-based performance. We worked with musicians as well. So it was a small group of performers, musicians, who came together and spent some time building this work actually in the hospital whilst it was functioning. And it was delightful having doctors, nurses, patients sort of wandering through, spending some time watching on their busy schedules, or just sort of spending a bit more time with us and enjoying. And I think it helped to sort of smooth, in a way, this difficult time when they were moving out from this place that was so meaningful to them and to the city as a whole, and feeling that it was another way of having the past being brought into the present so that they could deal with, in a way, the trauma of moving out and moving on to a new site. The actual performance was I'm trying to remember how many exactly. There were probably about 8 of us, I think, involved as dancers and musicians. And as I say, it was intergenerational, so we had children as well as those of us slightly older and in between. We had audiences who came to see the work in performance. Many of those had long experiences of being there either themselves as patients or visiting family members or friends or whatever, or had working lives there. So it was very interesting, some of those oral histories from nurses who remember sort of generations and changes over time, you know, and how things like how they were treated, what they should wear, some of the hierarchies, the way the management of the hospital sort of treated them differently. The parallel project was led by Talking Birds, as the theatre company here in Coventry, who did their project called, I think, Three Doctors. So they did the Three Doctors work and we did the 12 beds work. So they were the sort of companion pieces, I suppose. Even in the period that's since 2006, there has been a sort of tightening up of things like health and safety and the kind of ethical processes. I think we did do the work very ethically, but I think some of those sort of processes have tightened a little bit. So there's more anxiety about when you enter into those sort of spaces which are there to serve a particular purpose. However, I also think that there is still a welcoming to understanding that actually when you take people out of their normal day-to-day experiences and give them a chance to think differently about a space or a place, to think about their own histories, their own memories, which can be triggered by something like a dance performance, it can be such an enriching experience, and it can actually help to solidify communities and help communities feel a sense of belonging, sense of identity. So I think there is still a welcoming to the purpose and the point of this sort of work. So I still think, yes, we could probably do something similar. Whether or not within those particular kinds of contexts is another question. But I think there is a respect and recognition of the value and the purpose of that sort of work.